Hello trust friends, welcome back to the channel. In this game I've got a Blitz game looking at the Alekhine defense and specifically the Scandinavian variation, which is an improved Scandinavian for black. And it starts as we head into our traditional Alekhine setup, and instead of playing what he's supposed to do for an edge, white immediately gives up all edge and plays knight c3. This is a system with me being almost exclusively right now an Alekhine defense player against e4. I actually see this setup from white with knight c3 in about 50% of my games. So it's really important that we know what to do, and especially important that we know how to handle it when we end up in what's considered the Scandinavian variation of this. Where the knights are exchanged and the queen ends up on d5. This is already a great position for black. White has completely given up its edge. And the best book move, and the one that I face also consequently the most often here, is d4. I think c4 might be a little sneakier, but d4 is what you're going to see the most often. And I really like a move that is not in the top three suggested by the database. Your opponent's not really going to be prepped for it. It's going to be c5. c5 immediately threatening to win the pawn, and almost every time I am seeing in this position knight to f3, at which point I can just play knight to c6. Now I'm piling up on this pawn. I've got 3 attackers, only 2 defenders by white, and this is a great position to be in for black here. What I love about this position as well is white's top move is actually to play bishop to e3. It's very defensive, and after bishop to e3, white is going to have to look at playing more developing moves, perhaps moving the queen over here and going into a queenside castle. And most white players in this rating range in the 1500s, 1600s are not trying to castle queenside when they're playing against the Scandinavian. So white's best move here, bishop to e3, preparing a queenside castle, is one that gets overlooked in a major way, and immediately my opponent blunders, not blunders, but makes a pretty heavy inaccuracy or mistake and plays c4, threatening the queen. Now, if you're looking at this position, I want you to immediately spot what is the best move, which is queen to e4, coming with check. The best move here is not to block with the queen. It is actually to block with the bishop, so my opponent is playing correctly here. In this position, what's really interesting to note is that I don't do this in the game, and that's okay. I still end up with a great position. Black is supposed to take with the c-pawn here. I go ahead and take with the knight. The reason you're not supposed to take with the knight is because white can take back with his knight and immediately just achieve equality here. Now, the recapture with the queen is the best move. It is better than cd4. One of the reasons being, if I recapture with the pawn and white castles, I have at least 2 moves before I can castle. But within those 2 moves, white's rook is going to come here and it's going to be x-raying my queen through the bishop. So it's not a position that you necessarily want your queen to be in. There's a good chance within the next 3 moves you're going to have to move your queen. We don't necessarily like that. So I go ahead and take with the queen. He takes back, I take back, and already this game is essentially winning for black. Not winning on the spot, mind you. But the engine evaluation is almost 1.5 in favor of black right here already. And just to kind of recap, this is what we're seeing in the Scandinavian setup, or the Scandinavian variation of the Alekhine defense. When white decides to play knight c3, you immediately play d5. There is a variation where white can push, and that ends up in a queenless endgame. It's not my favorite endgame to go into, but it's very easy to play. I'll get a video up on that the next time that I face it. Here, after takes, take, the queen ends up going through this. The vital move here is c5. Your opponent won't be prepared for it. He'll play knight f3, which is the best move, But after we move through here into this sequence, even when I play this incorrectly and take with the knight instead of the pawn, this is still winning for black. Now there's still work to be done. One of the things that we are going to have to watch out for is this pawn is not yet defended, so at some point maybe black can get out here with the bishop and get some attack going on it. Also, this is not looking good for us over here because within one move, white's bishop is bearing down on this file. You may be thinking, okay, I'll just play the rook over, I'll lift the pawn, I'll bring the bishop over, and we'll get the light squared bishops off the board, but not so fast, because before you orient and initiate that plan, white can play f4 here, bishop to f4. And so with that in mind, I played e5. I played e5 specifically with the idea of later being able to play the bishop to b8, lifting the pawn, which also gives me an extra defender against that pawn promotion, getting my bishop out onto the good diagonal and doing some work over there. So that is the entire purpose of e5, is preventing his bishop from coming out to f4. Now, I feel like f4 could be a good move here for white, but f4 will be met with bishop here, and then after takes, it's all neutral. That doesn't improve the position for white, and black still has a passed pawn already. We're 11 moves in, black already has a passed pawn. So he does what he can. He's connecting the rooks here, and one of the things that I want to be cognizant of is some of this stuff, where he's getting some trades. So I immediately decide that I want to take control of the b4 square right off the bat. What's good about this plan is that if white really decides that he wants control of the b4 square, he's going to have to play a3 and then b4, or he's going to have to play a rook over and then b4. And before he does that, I can in one move, I can get my bishop to b4, initiate a trade, take over b4 with a pawn, and then I own that square. So I'm really in favor of this move. The engine didn't find it, but I like it, and I'm enjoying a nice advantage here, so I don't have to really press for anything. So here he goes, he's setting up this plan, and boom, done. Shut it down. Immediately taking ownership of that file. He can bring one piece to come and attack this pawn later, but not two. And I already have one piece defending it with the rook, and after the bishop comes over to d7, I'm going to have two pieces on it. So now I own this queenside over here. So he pulls the rook over. He's obviously looking to advance the pawn. Couple of move options here. We can put the bishop in front of it. We can play b6. I go ahead and play b6, and b6 is not great. b6 was not in the top three. But I went ahead and played it because now the pawn it can't advance. I still have a nice advantage here. Don't have to press for anything. Bishop comes over. It's tit for tat. There's two good squares where you can put the rook here. Pause the video and figure out if you think that you want to put the rook on b8 or if you want to put the rook on a7. One of them is slightly better than the other. There's not a huge difference, but which way would you go and why? I decided to play what ended up being the best move with the engine, which was rook to a7. I'm essentially just keeping an eye on this pawn, and if at any point he tries any of this stuff and I en passant and there's movement over here, I'm going to keep my rook on this file, anticipating that this file is going to open at some point down the road. If I end up deciding to trade these bishops off and I bring this guy over and he takes, and I take back, well, now my rook is aligned with this pawn, and so that's okay too. But in the meantime, if I don't decide to do that, I have my rook on the a file where I want it. So he comes in here, and there are a few options here for how to play this position. I don't find one of the best ones, but I just making some moves, getting developed. Maybe I'm thinking about castling, even though castling is maybe not the best idea here. There's no queens on the board. There's no knights on the board. An open board with the bishops is maybe like I want to have my king castled, but it's not that open of a board. We got pawns all over the place, and these two pawns over here are locked. They can't go anywhere. This square is locked, so this guy's not going anywhere. Like, these pawns over here are fixed, and so all of the bishops on the board are more or less hampered right now. So it's not an open board, and so without queens on the board, I'm already maybe thinking that I'm not going to castle in this game. So he comes in here. This is just a definite take for me, because now this pawn of his B pawn is still fixed, or else I get a runner right away. And so I really like this setup. I'm very happy that my rook is still on the A file and not chilling on the B file, though the B file, you know, would be okay as well. So I go ahead and play bishop E6 here, and my plan is that after he takes and I take back and I'm stacked, I didn't feel like I was really going to be that bad there. And the engine likes this move. The engine likes my position a lot now. As long as I take the bishop, which I do, the engine really, really likes my position. Now, should I just play F6 here, defending the pawn? No. If I play F6 here, defending the pawn, I'm going to lose my rook. So we can't have that. So I go ahead and find what is considered the best move in this position, even though it's giving away a pawn. And now look at this. Now look at this. What is Black's best move here? Black is massively ahead right now. In fact, Rook C7 basically somehow just ends the game right now. I don't find it, so the game's going to go on for a little bit, but Black's position is so good right now, even after giving up the E pawn, that Rook C7 all but ends the game. Now I don't do it. I find the third best move. I play King to D6. I figure if I can get this rook out of the way, then I can take this pawn, and then we're all biscuits and gravy at that point. So he correctly keeps an eye on it there, and I do find F6 here, preventing him from coming in. He does find the infiltration. Uh-oh, I'm giving up another pawn. And he comes back here to create the defense. Now, he can take that pawn on his next move. There's nothing that I can do, really, other than pushing the pawn to defend it. But I decide to go ahead and just start running the A pawn. Now, this isn't great. He is supposed to take here, and he does. I'm supposed to take back, and I do. He now cannot take my pawn, okay? So coming back here, let's take a look at this. It's Black to move. It looks like Black's gonna lose a pawn, and there's nothing he can do to defend it. So you gotta get creative in these situations, right? You have two pawns hanging. You have to look at the resources that you have available in the position, and one of the resources that I have available in the position is if this file opens up and I get my rook down there, that's checkmate. That's checkmate. Doesn't matter if I'm 2 pawns down. It doesn't matter if you're 2 pawns down. If you checkmate your opponent when you're 2 pawns down, you win. You can see the time at the bottom of the screen. I'm down to 22 seconds at this point, so you're going to see me make a few inaccuracies. This was one of them. Supposedly after B takes, I'm supposed to play D3, but Rook A3 is almost equal there. He has to prevent mate, so he vents the pawn, and now I start the pawn walk. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Now, he does not find the best move here. Rook to D4 is not the best move here. What I'm looking to do is I'm looking to bring the rook down with check to make his king move, swing the rook back, threatening this pawn, but also creating luft for my pawn to advance. I'm still just letting the B6 pawn hang. I still don't care. Rook takes B6 is the best move here. And he does take it. He plays it. White's ahead. The problem is after check and king goes to H2 and rook here, White has to find a move. White has to find d6. He has to find d6 and start running the pawn. If he does, he's good. He doesn't, he checks me first. King coming up to d6, rook back to b6 check, king to e5, rook bails, and now it's game over. And this was it. I had 23 seconds left on my clock now. With the 2-second delay, I actually gained some time back. My opponent is down to 7 seconds on his clock. He's not able to complete the game. And we go through a few more moves. I threaten here, he checks, I'm here, he checks, I'm here, he checks, I'm here. And this is all going to end very well. He's down to 3 seconds, he's here, I'm here. He can take, but I'm going to take back with the rook. And black is just winning. If white takes, I can queen. Now both rooks are hanging. This is just going to be bad news. So, really interesting game. Really interesting game in this Scandinavian setup. Variation of the Alekhine, I should say, the Scandinavian variation of the Alekhine, where you can play this c5 move, and even when your opponent plays correctly, eventually at this rating range they're going to try to play c4 and check you, and you just have to remember queen e4, and you're already ahead. White's advantage is completely gone, and black is just ahead at this point, despite not being ahead any material. So, hope you guys enjoyed this one. It was good for you Alekhine players out there. You're going to run into this Scandinavian variation, so I just want you to be familiar with these lines that you're going to come up, and hopefully found this one interesting, and it was a good game, and we got the win.